Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm super excited that you're here, and I have an amazing guest for you today. He's become a really, really quick friend, which is normally a good sign in my life. Arthur, welcome to the podcast. How are you, man?
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. I feel like from the first moment we met, there was a connection, and I really, really love that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, there is something to be said about meeting your kind of people, finding people from your tribe, whatever term, you want to use. Uh, I've wondered this and I've thought this, but I always think of this after we get off a phone call because our calls are like wildfires. And then we normally end them because we have to, not because we want
Right.
to. And then when I get off the call, I have like a list of things I meant to ask you. So, um, this is a good way to just kick this off. What do you think it is before we get into who you are and all that? What do you think it is that you find in some people and you just instantly know these are my people or that's my tribe? What is that thing that you found in your life? Like what we connected with?
I don't think I can put my finger on any specific thing. I think it's energy. For
Mm,
me, it's all about energy. It's all about how comfortable I am, how relaxed I am around you.
hmm
If I find myself that I need to put up my shield, like in Star Trek, uh, then those are not the right people for me.
Right.
And some people give and some people take,
Mm,
right? And I think when you find the people that are right for you, those are the ones that give.
that's
Those are
true.
the ones,
Yeah.
those are the ones that give to you, and you can return, you can give back to them, and it's an equal exchange, and you both walk away going, "That was great,"
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to somebody walking away going, "Oh, I got a headache," or "I don't know what that was about." And I think that's the most important thing, that both of you are willing to give and to rotate your energy with complete abandon.
Oh
And
man,
those
that's
are the most
beautiful.
wonderful people. Hmm.
Rotate your energy, dude. What a beautiful statement. And I mean, I've always said this, anybody that's watched this podcast knows, we talk heavily about childhood trauma and different things like that. But one of the things I've always thought was interesting is, my feelers are my guidance system, especially when I meet people. And coming from any kind of unresolved trauma, when you meet people, you'll have a lot of paranoia, a lot of anxiety, and you can't tell if that's coming from that person or not. And so
Right.
it really lends towards isolation from relationships, and then the first time somebody turns out to be a turd, that's a professional term. It, it, it just then proves to you that all of your negative instincts were right and you abandon a lot of that and you just continue to fall down in isolation. And
Right.
when I met you, I had been going through a little bit of a time where it's like, I need a break from new people because a lot of new people were coming in because of wonderment and, you start discovering agendas and all this kind of stuff, organizational things. But man, when I met you and the team at dinner and what you just said explained it, it was a giving. Like everybody at that table was giving to everybody else. There was no like, so tell me, what have you done in your career? And you instantly know they're wanting to know what you can help them with, you know?
That's right.
So that's beautiful. Rotating energy. That's exactly what was happening at that dinner table with all of us. Everybody was just rotating, blessing each other, loving each other, understanding each other. It was so organic. And when I
If you can
left,
remember, if you can remember the feeling, because the feeling I always get when that happens naturally
mm-hmm,
is that you're in a bubble.
yeah,
That you keep, like, even when the waiter comes over, you're like, What's that going on there?" And
yeah,
like, you forget that you're in a restaurant. You forget that whatever everything outside is, and you're just in this bubble of these people, and you just feel wonderful in it.
yeah, yeah. And when I left, most times, more times than not, when I leave an engagement with one person, much less a table full of people, I need at least an hour to just kind of process everything that I felt or I thought I felt or all the mental stuff, When I left there, I was so energized. I didn't have that exhausted, depleted feeling. And that's the main thing I wanted to talk about with our time today for our audience
Sure.
is this idea of running out of energy, always kind of running at an exhausted, like you can get up, but then boo, real quick. I started looking for ways. Again, our viewers already know this. You know, I left the church 20 years ago, and when I left, I didn't have a structure to help me
Hmm.
understand the world. And so it got really dark. I always use an example of, you know, my car broke down, headed to Colorado to film a documentary. And at this time in my life, before that, I could always say, oh, that was the devil or that was God, right? Like, but then all of a sudden, I didn't have any way of understanding just random acts because I always had a method. And I bring that up as kind of like our base level to talk about because without a structure to hold on to, a lot of people with, you know, unhealed trauma, we just bounce around the feeling spectrum all day long. And I started a long, long journey. I've looked into a lot of other things. I've practiced a lot of other things. And then I stumbled across a book called The Tao of Pooh. And is that the proper name or is it? Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
Tao. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was 20 years ago. And I moved on. I thought it was too simplistic. I thought it was too philosophical. I didn't feel there was a practical because I was just scanning it standing in a Barnes and Noble, right? And I'm like, that's not for me. And I moved on to other more regimented kind of things. And so 20 years later, I'm sitting at a table talking about another project to help people. This particular project is helping people with, you know, addiction. Um, and I find out I'm sitting next to a Tao master. And everything that I said, you had a really simplistic, not from a condescending, arrogant tone, which I want to really be
Thank you.
clear here. You just, when we talk about the Tao, every conversation leaves me feeling at ease, safe, and comfortable. And I've never had that conversation about any other system, philosophy, belief, religion, however you want to classify all of the things. This is the first thing that I have found that I feel in my spirit calms me down and brings me back to a starting place where I'm not freaking out and spiking energy all over the place. So that's like a huge intro. Can you explain for our viewers that are like, what are we talking about?
Sure.
How did you get to this point? You know, real quick, what your journey was like, what your background's like, uh, and help us start kind of understanding a little bit of what the Tao is. Big question.
Yeah.
And can you do that in 2 minutes? Thanks, Arthur. Great.
So let's let's separate those two so we can eat the elephant one bite at a
Mm-hmm.
time. So let's talk a little bit about the Tao, and then I'll talk about how I came to it and what my personal journey was. Um, so Taoism is about 4,000 years old as far as we can understand. And at first, it wasn't called a Tao. It was translated as rivers and streams. And the reason for that is because people who were then living in China in the cities experienced a lot of pollution, even back then.
Mm.
Pollution that comes from living as part of a society,
Right.
right? And when they went looking for answers of how to lead a better life or how to lead a life that is calmer and more rewarding, they went to rivers and streams.
Mm.
They went to hang out in places where they felt calmness,
It's okay.
where they felt at ease, where they felt that nature was most represented and the beauty of nature was most represented. Not to mention, those were the cleanest places. So that's how it started. And then around 2,500 years ago, it was codified in a set of poems, and that was put in a book. It was 81 poems that were put in a book called the Tao Te Ching. The legend goes that it was a person named Lao Tzu that put it together,
Okay.
and that we can go down a deep rabbit hole whether the person existed, not existed, was an angel, not an angel. Let's not. That's not relevant.
Right.
What's relevant is that the way these 81 poems were created was not by some guys sitting around going, hey, this is a great idea. They were created by people observing nature and extrapolating the rules from nature of how to behave. Now,
Awesome.
what does that include? That includes water. Water actually gave us humility because water always flows downstream. It pools at the lowest level where it gets its strength. And
Hmm.
yet, water is soft, right? And it carves the Grand Canyon.
Love it.
So, in that, when watching water, they found principles. In watching animals, they found principles. In watching the seasons, they found principles. And all of those came together in a yin yang symbol, which was the first really amazing logo. And it lasted for thousands of years. So you can
Mhm.
say that it's possibly the best logo ever,
Yeah, for sure.
possibly the best brand ever. So, so in that symbol, their whole philosophy of Taoism was codified from what they observed in nature. And here's the secret to that symbol. A lot of people think it's balance. A lot of people think it's harmony, and it is. But that's not the true nature of it. The true nature of it is the rules of this world are. This world is based on certain fundamental rules, and the most important rules to know is that it is the interaction of opposites that creates energy rotation. That's why the symbol is round
Mm-hmm.
and not a triangle or a square. It is representing the flow of energy, rotation of energy,
Gotcha.
right? So, and if you look at that symbol, it has a squiggly line, not a straight line, but a
Mm-hmm.
squiggly line. And that shows the push and pull of opposites on each other. Now, everybody knows that the little black circle and the little white circle represents the lack of purity. So there's no such thing as 100% anything in nature. Everything is always mixed.
Okay.
So even when you look at opposites, they have a part of them which is the opposite as part of them.
Sure.
So it's a lot of paradoxes, but when you really start to understand them, you understand how the key to understand. So when you start to look at these thoughts, these extrapolations of how to understand this world, you naturally calm down because it gives you a framework of how to think about it.
Mm.
And you naturally then go, oh, okay, so these rules weren't created by people. And the things that are created by people, the problem with it, it's not that they're not brilliant. They are. And then they're beautiful. But they change with time and geography. Nature doesn't. Nature is as close to permanent as we understand in this world. So that's why for thousands of years, the Tao Te Ching hasn't changed.
Because it's
It's been the
nature.
same because nature hasn't changed, right? So what and the other part that it's important to point out is that the Tao Te Ching was created not for everybody. And I know this is going to trigger some people, but it wasn't created for everybody. It was created for people who considered themselves warriors that wanted to have a journey inward,
Mm. Okay.
that
I didn't know
needed to
that.
have a journey inward.
Okay.
Those were the warriors because the whole Tao Te Ching is about cultivation, cultivation of self, cultivation of energy in order to really experience this life, in order to find joy in this life, in order to, for your soul, that the journey it goes on to have fulfillment and understanding in this life. So, and we can talk about this forever, but
Sure.
the last thing I'll say about it is because it's modeled after a system. Nature is a system. It's an ecosystem. Everything is related to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The Tao Te Ching is also a system which encompasses the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. Or let's say it another way: the most visible and tangible to the most invisible and intangible.
Gotcha.
And it's all the same rules that go through all of those bodies because
Mm.
it's one system, not a collection of. So that in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. You did great job. I mean, philosophically speaking, um, you're already rocking my brain there because in Western cultures, we have kind of that Greek concept of there's the mind, there's the body, there's the soul. Some people even throw the spirit in there as another element. And, one of the things that I've learned in working with kids with trauma and stuff is that you have to diagram out some of these things so that people can understand that you're working in different bodies or different sections of the system. But it is one system. We're just
Mm-hmm.
zooming in, right? So we
Right.
went from one thing, we zoomed in, now you've got three things. You zoom in, you can keep going in. And so many of the people that I work with, again, I'm going to keep bringing this back to trauma and those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Either they never had a system put in place for them to
Mm-hmm.
understand, or they never found that system, or they had it, but it was weaponized against them. So
Right.
now they are in denial of that system, you know?
Right.
And so they're just living out of whack. So it's funny because you've talked about trusting instincts, in other conversations we've had. As I've been trying to figure out wonderment and those things for the last several years, I've also noticed other things that caught my interest. We've talked about, Buckminster Fuller's work and biomimicry. And there just seems, I'm coming at you for the right hook here, completely off topic a little bit here, but it just seems that there is a built-in denial in humans, like a refusal to want to understand the natural system. Like there's a
It's not a
resistance.
refusal.
Okay.
Yes, it's not about even the resistance. I
What's
think
the
it's
right
deeper
word?
than that.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the right word is, but I think it goes deeper than that. And I think it all stems from fear.
Okay.
And I think that what happened to us as a species, and again, I'd like to have a disclaimer here,
Sure.
and a disclaimer that every good Taoist teacher always gives in the beginning of any like serious conversation is, I may be totally wrong. And
Right.
please, please listen to what I say, but check it out.
Right.
Don't take my word for it. Just use me as a guide, not as God, as
Yeah.
somebody who knows everything. I really don't. And as I stumble through this life like everybody else, the way I think about things, the way I teach has changed so many times that I can't even tell you. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the disclaimer.
Got it. Fair enough.
Um, but this is where I think what happened to us as a species, that we were afraid of nature for so long because we didn't have any way of defending against nature.
No.
Because when we were less than, when we before we built our civilizations, when we were part of the forest or the tundra or the jungle, we were defenseless.
Yeah.
We had no teeth. I mean, pathetic, really.
Mm-hmm.
We had no claws. I mean, mine are really super soft. I mean, I don't know what they're for. Um, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had no speed. We had no strength. The only thing we had was our brains that allowed us two things. Well, actually, one thing which was actually really the most important thing. It allowed us to imagine.
Mm.
It allowed us to create. We're the only species that we can see, and again, I could be wrong,
Yeah.
that creates, that looks up in the sky and goes, what's that? What's the moon? What's the stars? And why are we here? And no other species asked that. And that's the edge that we had. But it didn't give us a lot of protection. We didn't have armor. So when the rain came down, a lot of us got cold and sick and
Yep.
died. We just so what happened was is then we got into societies, and thousands of years passed, and industrial revolution and science came into play, and suddenly we figured things out, like electricity and gravity, and we created mathematical formulas that
Mm-hmm.
suddenly unlocked these great mysteries. And like if you go to any school, and this is true regardless whether it's a martial arts school or an academic school or anything, the beginning students are always the ones that are screaming the loudest about how much they know,
Right.
and they
Yeah.
know the least.
It's true in a street fight too.
right?
Yeah.
And the ones that are quiet, those are the ones you got to be watching out for.
Um,
Those are dangerous ones. But in a school, like in a martial arts school, it's the ones who don't talk about it ever
mhm.
that you have to be careful with, right? So it's the same thing with us. We're a very young species. We're like the beginning students. And we felt like as we quote unquote conquered nature, we
Right.
created shelters, we created clothes, we created agriculture where our food supply was no longer contingent
Hmm.
on what we caught or what we found, right? We became arrogant. We felt that we were above nature. And you can see this in old
Oh,
writings and
yeah.
even in old movies and everything,
Hmm.
right? I mean, even think of Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
Think of that movie that we were able to reanimate the dead.
Yeah.
That's like the ultimate, death is the ultimate conquering of nature, right? And we felt that we can do that. So that's why in our subconscious, this is not a conscious thing, this is not something we're taught, but in our subconscious as a species, we have this idea that we're above nature. And unfortunately, that's arrogance. And unfortunately, we'll find out the hard way
Yeah.
we're not above nature.
Right. And this is a story that, I mean, whether it's legend or lost history, we've heard of this leading to resets in society, right? Like supposedly that's what happened with Atlantis, that
Right.
they got to such technological, and so it seems like that's even a cycle within this natural system. Right now, this, my day job is producing YouTube channels and stuff like that. And, Joe Scott, who does a science channel, Answers with Joe, literally right now, while you and I are doing this podcast, they are in Yellowknife, Canada. They're about to fly up 2 hours. They're going to be just like 60 miles from the Arctic Circle. And they're working with the Smithsonian on the oldest exposed piece of land on Earth. And they're trying to date it. They're doing all these really cool things. And what's crazy about that is we're so far removed from nature that what now seems like major cutting edge science a lot of times feels like just people observing nature. Like the pendulum has swung so far over here, like we're AI'd out and, all these things, which all that I think there's good in all of these things. But then if somebody comes over here and goes, did you guys happen to watch that waterfall and the way it did this? That's like mind blowing kind of stuff, right? Um, so there definitely seems to be, and like I'm struggling for the word, but within humans, there's this, I'm just going to say resistance for a lack of, or whatever it
Sure.
is. But my point in bringing that up is it's weird how once we're injured, a lot of times we resist the very thing we need. There's
Yes.
a, there's a fear run. So we experience pain and the fight or flight, fawn. We got all these other ones now. It feels like most people are just subconsciously run, disappear from life. We don't really physically run away anymore. We run into our technology. We run into our addictions. We run into all these things. And yet this concept, which is why I wanted to have you on here in the first place, this is all just groundwork, is really how does a Taoist view helping others? What
Mm-hmm.
is the Taoist view on reaching out to people? Now I'm playing a little more dumb than I should here because you've explained some of these things to me, but for our audience, I found this fascinating because, um, I'm going to give you another huge question that you can try to pick apart, right? So many people I know that have left organized religion of some sort, they live their life with this aching, I'm speaking of myself, this aching feeling like there's something missing because what the church for me provided, even though it was a very toxic environment, it provided a natural place for me to go and serve my community. And I was raised to feeling the feelings and the dopamine drop and all the chemical kicks you get when you're serving, whether it was a soup kitchen or whatever it was. Now you leave your organized religion and you don't really have that. And you're looking for a way to serve. And so you strike out on your own, and you start finding out, people are a little bit leery of you when you're just trying to serve without an organization, right? So what happened with me and so many other people is we got separated from our method of serving, but now we just kind of feel incomplete because we aren't serving. And I had this conversation with your friend Kate last week that you introduced me to. And this is really hard for me. I'm bringing this up because this is my own struggle. But when you and I talk about the Tao, it's such a different perspective of helping people. And I choke on it to try to get that understanding. Can you explain to our viewers the Taoist approach of serving your community, loving people, and helping people? I'm good at those big ass questions, aren't I? And you got 30 seconds. Yeah. The questions should get bigger and the time should get smaller as we go.
All right, let's try to tackle this way. So there's so many facets and there's so many different conversations to have around this question that you asked that it's not a straightforward. It is not as straightforward. There's no straight line here to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough.
I can work several angles and several concepts, and we can try to understand what that looks like.
Okay.
So let's start with the fundamentals. The fundamentals are that in this world, the reason that I talked about having a journey inward with Taoism is because that is the start of the journey. In Taoism, the journey starts inside. It's the journey inside that ultimately manifests as the journey outside. That your insides become your outside and you become the model of the world. And what do I mean by that? As you work on yourself and you cultivate yourself and you figure out your character and you understand who you are and you most importantly unconditionally accept without judgment who you are as this whole being, physically, mentally, and spiritually, you become different. Not because you are different, but because the energy that surrounds you becomes more grounded and it becomes heavier. You literally become heavier in your soul, in your density. Not that your body becomes heavier, but the weight as you walk into a room. And that journey inward, that very painful journey, by the way, gives you a certain understandings. Now, let's look at the opposite. When a lot of people are brought up in a place that you were brought up in or other institutions, they are taught that the outside is more important than the inside.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That it is you're constantly giving, but there is no conversation on what are you taking that you need, and more importantly, there's no conversation what happens when you run out of energy to give. Because if you don't cultivate that energy inside of you, you will run out, because if you're always giving, if I have $10 and I'm always giving out pennies, sooner or later I run out of money. How do I replenish that money? How do I replenish that energy? And that is the journey inward.
Okay.
That you understand how to cultivate that within you so that you can give and so that you can take. Because when we first met, it wasn't Arthur giving to Damian and it wasn't Damian giving to Arthur. I gave and I took, and you gave and you took. And between us, we had this exchange and we both walked away going, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Can we do that again?
Yeah.
And in fact, even now as I talk about it, I can feel that exchange happening between you and I, because energy has no distance, right? So we're all very connected. And when we make these kind of connections, that amplifies, that moves that connection to the front where you can actually feel it. So that's the beginning of trying to answer that question.
Okay.
The other side of this, or at least a side of this, is the humility to understand that you cannot help anyone who doesn't ask for help. I can be God, but without you praying to me, I cannot help you. Why? Number one, if I help you without you asking me, I'm imposing my view on the world on you. Right. My life's journey is right and yours is wrong, and I know better.
Right.
Well, that doesn't sound like humility. Right? So the humility to understand that all I can do is work on myself. And when people come to me and ask for help, all I can do is just show them who I am. I'm not actually helping them. I'm showing them the journey. I'm representing the journey that I went on so that they can model that for themselves,
Mm.
because we are modeling creatures.
Yes, big time.
So if I was to actively help them, I would be imposing my ideas on.
You see, right there, I can tell you a huge amount of our viewers can feel what I'm talking about. When you just, that, especially that last part, I felt a ease and a release. Like, oh, and it's not something that I've never heard. It's like coming back to it. Like, oh, yeah. We get so distracted by all these other things over time. But that is truly what Jesus did. You know, Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was not these things. These all happened after his time here. And so you look at how he physically lived his life. It's exactly what you're talking about. He didn't knock down doors and be like, what are you doing? You know, that meme with Jesus. I saw that. It cracks me up, you know. Um, it wasn't like that. It was always people coming to him,
Yes,
asking to be healed.
yes,
I've never connected those dots. I've never understood that. And this is a really large struggle for a lot of people. There are a lot of people with kind hearts that want to help people in their community. They're doing it for the right reason. And they're exhausted. Again, I was talking to Kate about this last week. They're exhausted because they're doing it from, I don't want to say the wrong place, but there's no way to sustain that unless people are coming to you. Because honestly, when my kids come to me, if I go to my kids and I tell them, you do this, this, and this, and I'm going to give you this money or something like that, you have to stay on them. It's exhausting. If my kids come to me and ask for something, I feel fine. And I haven't been thinking about, oh, they need to be taking out the trash. They need to be picking up the poop in the backyard. They need to.
yep. You're back. So no, you're fine.
I think I've lost you, man. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. And now for a short pause as we wait for Damian to come back. Please stay tuned. Hopefully, Damian will edit this out.
You there?
I'm there.
I'm sitting here looking out the window and we have a Spectrum internet truck outside and I lost access. So I guess the internet crashed or something. All right.
That's okay.
All
So
right.
if we can pick up, there was something I wanted to share with you as part of what you were talking about.
Yes, please.
When you help people that don't ask for help, you are interfering in their life. Interference takes a lot of energy. So you're always spending enormous amount of energy, but the return on that is horribly low or negative because those people didn't ask for help. And if they're polite, well, it might be a nice exchange. If they're not polite, it's pretty awful. Um, so when you interfere in other people's lives because of your ideas, you are spending your own energy like there's no tomorrow. You're going bankrupt without even understanding that. And what
Wow.
are you getting in return? Are any of those people giving back to you? No,
No.
because they did not come to you and want that relationship. You force this relationship on them.
It's such a simple concept. Like it's not, it makes so much sense that if somebody's not asking for help, it's going to be total resistance. And that's going to be a way heavier lift, for lack of better term. But I also got to tell you, man, I'm not pausing for effect. I'm pausing to make sure I want to say this, but vulnerability is a key in my life. Like that has saved my ass 1,000 times. And I kind of push myself in that direction, but I got to tell you what you're describing is explaining where and how I get so much resentment over the years. You know, we have this identity of how we view ourselves. And I've always viewed myself right, wrong, whatever. I don't want to be a white knight, but I definitely don't want to just spend my life making money, doing my thing. I want to feel like I helped this world. And the things that I've tried, the more insane radical things when I was younger, and I've told you, I mean, I was in radical groups like God Squad, and we, smuggled Bibles into communist China. Like we were saving the world, right? Even if it meant we were going to die. Um, to be raised like that and then come to this point, and now I'm talking to a dude, and he's like, you're not supposed to try unless they're asking you. I mean, it's
Well,
it's so overwhelming to hear, but I feel instant release of a lot of resentment because people aren't giving back, and they're not wanting your help. So why the hell am I trying to? You know what I'm saying? That's such a
I
weird
do.
thing.
Well,
So
there
weird.
is like, remember, there's a little black and white circle in the opposite. So there is a little tiny caveat to that, and that
Mm,
is if somebody's drowning or burning or their life is in danger and they physically cannot ask for help.
okay.
But once again, you're not really doing it for them. You're doing it for yourself. You're going to feel great about yourself when you save their
Oh,
life.
no doubt. And you don't
And
want
the
to live
reason
your
you,
whole life watching them drown. You don't want to live
no,
with that, right?
no, but the reason you want to understand that is so you don't expect anything from them in return. That's why you want to understand that. It's not about being selfish or any other word. It's so that you don't have the wrong expectations for what just happened.
Yep. I
That's all.
I've been tiptoeing around this. I went through I call it a Buddhist run. One of the
Hmm.
ones that I studied more than the other. And after a while, I have a lot of very good friends that are practicing Buddhist, but it was a little bit darker for me. It felt like you were kind of expecting more negative things. I don't know. For me, I found myself on a darker path, with that. And once I was dealing with that, what I found out was so many people that were calling themselves Buddhists and practicing Buddhists were really depressed, like heavily depressed, because they were trying to let go of so many expectations. They were trying to offload all of them, but by still doing the same things. So it's great to let go of your expectations, but you're still doing this practice that's generating the need to have expectations, right? So, or am I just confusing
Yes.
myself?
No, no, you're right. I don't really want to dive into other practices,
Sure.
honestly.
No.
Buddhism was one I did for 7 years.
Okay.
It was the beginning of my journey, actually. That's how I got into spirituality, is I was a Buddhist for 7 years with lots of practices. For me personally, it did not work.
Right.
And it did not work, not because it wasn't right, but
Mm-mm.
because it wasn't right for me.
Right.
And in the end of the day, it didn't answer the questions that I had going into it. And that was the biggest problem for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taoism did. And again, it did for me. And
Right.
what's right for me is not necessarily right for you. But I just want to, because we have so much, there's so much in this. I just want to go back for 1 second to what you
Please.
said before about you succeeding in vulnerability. Is that the right way to phrase it?
Yeah. That's better than how I said it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, and the way my mind translates that is being vulnerable allows me to ask for help. And to this day, I do. To
Yeah.
this day, I reach out to friends when there's something that I'm like, "Huh, you know what? I need a different perspective on this because the results I'm getting, or I'm just not able to think of it in a way that makes me comfortable. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to reach out and find out how other people did it. And maybe, and always, there's always a takeaway. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's perfect
Yeah.
right there. And
Yep.
that's what I'm going to follow.
Yep.
So vulnerability is another understanding of humility. And that's really, and you're not exposed. You're in a place because if we think of the opposite of humility, that's arrogance.
Yeah.
So being vulnerable is being not in a place of arrogance. So our arrogance is I'm rigid, I'm a closed system, and I know everything.
Yeah. Right.
Humility is I'm flexible, I'm adaptable, and I know nothing.
Water.
So water. That allows me to ask for help. That allows me to reach out. And I have no problem reaching out and saying, hey. So that's one little pin into it. Can
Mm-hmm.
we There's
Yeah,
another one that you mentioned, and
please.
you say so much. It is. I don't want to interrupt you because it's
No,
so
just
wonderful.
imagine being
But
my wife. I do this all day, every day. I go on long runs and then ask her to have a thought about it. That's why my friends are puppets, dude. I mean, what do you want from me? Yeah.
I love that. I love that. You talked about I don't want to spend this life making money. I want something else in this life. And my old friend, who was one of the most amazing Taoist teachers I've ever met, frankly, he unfortunately passed away, which is sad for the whole world. But
Mm,
he had this phrase: wealth without fulfillment is poverty. And what does that mean? It means this world is a balance between the spiritual and the material. It is not one side or the other. It is a balance, and that balance shifts all the time. Just the way you are, the way you walk from when you were 1 year old to when you're 90, the way
mm,
you walk, the balance of that shifts all the time. And you have to have both, but you can't be stuck on either one of them for too long.
mm,
So money is important because it's part of this world. It is a physical part of this world. We need that to manifest, to be able to survive, to eat, to be able to help our family and everything else. The spiritual side, the contentment, the fulfillment is extremely necessary, but get stuck on that too long and you'll wind up living homeless under a bridge, right? So it is a balance between them. But one without the other, remember, it doesn't work. It is the
yeah.
push and pull of opposites.
Yeah. Yeah.
The visible and the invisible, or the tangible and the intangible, their interaction together creates contentment, creates the flow of energy, right?
Yeah.
And
No, I mean I'm trying not to interrupt you and not go on long tangents. It's if you ever want to get free help and therapy, you start a podcast, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, audience, this is just not for you anymore. You can turn this off now if you want.
so true.
Me and my family here, we got questions. I
Like,
what has happened and what's funny is just so the audience knows, we recorded a podcast and I did not hit record, so we talked for an hour and a half. I believe I didn't hit record, and now we're doing it again. But what's different is the last one was really energetic and I was, it was exciting, it was very good. But this one for some reason keeps hitting me with these right hooks that are they're taking me back because I I thought I was doing so good by trying to manually let go of expectations. So I'm going to do something to help someone without them asking, right? And then, well, they aren't happy about it. Well, I just need to remove the expectations. I should just be helping people just to be helping people. And what you're explaining to me is and that's where I was going with the Buddhist part. I never could understand that part was I can't just keep removing the expectations. I can't go
no, you're
slap
human.
some dude in the face and then remove the expectation he's going to beat my ass, right? Like I couldn't, I couldn't ever cross
You're
through
hu-
that.
so Buddhism tries to solve the understanding of this world or the path of this world in their own way, and they have a philosophy around it. Taoism does as well, and others, obviously, a lot of rich traditions in India and everything. They all try to create frameworks. And by the way, so does every religion.
Sure. Yeah.
And 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 what's important to note is there's wisdom everywhere. So there's no such thing as all good or all bad. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, what happens with people who go through a journey like you is that in order to transcend that, you have to throw everything out.
Yes.
But the
Everything.
journey back, when you really finally, when the emotions subside, you start to be able to truly see that there's parts of it that are actually really, really profound and work for you. And throwing everything out doesn't work. So in Buddhism, there's a lot of things that work. For me, what did not work was the fact that you're pushing your humanity away.
Hmm.
You're getting rid of you're subsiding on three mosquitoes a day, and you're licking the dew off of the plants and everything,
Right.
and you're never satisfied with food. You're never satisfied with water. You're working all the time. But most importantly for me, it was all about the fact that this world should be transcended. and there's a nirvana to get to, a place of no wind, literally
Mm-hmm.
translates as a place of no wind. That bothered me because you're always giving up today for tomorrow.
Yeah.
You're never present. You're not enjoying because you're always focused on what's going to happen tomorrow. And one day you're going to die, and who knows what's going to happen. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you'll get to nirvana or maybe not. But you've missed all those todays. You've missed every single today looking forward to tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Right? So that was a problem that I had for it myself, because I fasted. My last fast was for 22 days
Mm.
without food, just water. I tried the celibacy thing, which is a really dumb thing to do when you're a male in your 20s.
I'm going to leave that one alone because I can't imagine, dude. Yeah.
No, but it was all about trying to prove to myself that I could, which was a dumb thing to prove.
Sure.
But you have to go through it.
Yeah.
And unless if you don't go through it, you're not going to take anybody else's word for it.
That's right.
And the meditations that I did, a lot of them focused on letting go of self. And that was an issue for me because I liked myself and I didn't want to let go. And I didn't understand letting go why.
Right.
And then Taoism answered that for me.
Yeah.
Taoism actually had an answer for that. And what was fascinating for me is that it took me decades in Taoism to understand what the Buddhists were talking about.
Mm.
So in Taoism, it's every human that's born in this planet, subconsciously, by nature's design, by our own instincts, tries to answer a fundamental question: who do I have to become to get love? Let's flip that a little bit. Let's rewrite that a little bit. Who do I have to become to survive to adulthood? So every child tries to answer that question, and it answers it by fitting in to what the parents want, to what teachers want, to what the priests want, to what the friends want, and without knowing it, their sense of self becomes that construct that was needed to be created to fit in and survive.
Yes. Absolutely.
So the self you're trying to let go is not your soul. It is the construct that is interfering in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. The identity
And
that
that is
you've made.
yes,
Yeah.
without knowing it. Because your identity would be similar but different had you grown up in a different family,
Right.
had a different path.
Right.
You still might say, oh, that person is similar, but no, that construct that overlaid that soul is
Mm-hmm.
different. So the meditation is necessary to transcend that construct, but nobody really talks about it. So when you're trying to let go of something, you have no real understanding what you're trying to let go of, and most importantly, why.
Right.
So, but Taoism did have all those answers. The meditative practices, the physical practices, the philosophy, all had an interaction in those practices,
Right.
and all had a part of those practices.
It's I don't want to sound like I'm now just all the Tao and pushing the Tao, and that's what this podcast is. It's certainly not what the podcast is about, but
Sure.
it is about understanding our journey and our path. And I'm going to keep peeling this onion until I get to the thing that works. Right. I mean, I'm pretty simple about it. And, in the short time that I've been looking at the Tao and these things, one of the things that's so interesting, I'm a psychotic research guy. So every night, part of my fun is just researching rabbit holes, whatever it might be, and at 49, I've already been through all the alien rabbit holes, the ancient Egyptian I've been through all of those. Right. And so when you go to search, I encourage anyone, do a basic YouTube search on understanding the Tao, or do one on the history of the Tao. What you find is a bunch of people talking about, is Tao with a D or with a T, right? You get like this academic explanation. Some of them had some really cool animations that went with it, but it's like historical.
Mm-hmm.
And then over here, you find just like the scriptures from the Tao Te Ching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's this huge space in between. And so I've always been
Huh.
like, why? And then when I met you, you told me you don't really learn the Tao on your own. Like you don't really just, I'm interested. This sounds like makes sense. It's, resonating with me. Where do people start? Because anything today that starts with, you got to find a teacher, that's really difficult, man. Like try to find a therapist, much less a Tao master that can teach it.
Well, yes, you're right. That isn't easy, but um, why don't you go ahead and study how to fly a plane on your own without an instructor?
I'll do it.
Why don't you go ahead and study how to be a brain surgeon without a teacher? Why don't you go ahead and do anything that humans do? Building a house, anything. Absolutely anything without a teacher. We're not meant to be alone. Our species, the thing that gave us power was our interdependence with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We created emotions like empathy to be interdependent with each other so that your strengths could augment my weaknesses and my strengths could augment your weakness.
That
And
was
we
our
were never
edge.
meant to do this journey. Yes, we were never meant to do this journey alone. None of us. Some
Yeah,
of us are more loners than others. Granted, there's always been hermits and stuff like
sure.
that. Fine, that's fine. But we're talking about the species, not the
Yeah,
individuals here. And the species was not meant to do it alone. Otherwise, we would have been dead
yeah.
so many times. We would have been extinct. Like there's no tomorrow. Why would you think that clarity in the journey of life you're able to achieve by yourself in the pathetic little nothing of time that we have here when there's thousands of years of humans actually not only working on it but living it and passing it on to their students and other people and everything? Why do you have to reinvent the wheel all over again
Yeah.
every generation? That doesn't make any sense when I describe it that way.
No,
You'd
it
be
doesn't.
like, every generation has to invent their own automobile from scratch without ever seeing an automobile. That's exactly what you're asking.
That's amazing.
When you look at everything humans do, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants,
Yeah.
on the Edisons, on the Teslas, on the Elon Musks, and everything else. We're always standing on the shoulders of giants. There's always people in our civilizations that move things forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then we build upon that. The
Right.
microprocessor was not created because some guy in the basement went, I have an idea. No,
Right.
it was 100 years of science, experiment, thought, and God knows how many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people contributing to that one moment where, aha,
Oh,
all
there it
those came
is. Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
right? Why is it that this life we're taught that you have to do it alone
I
or you
think,
have to figure it out alone?
yeah, I can, I'm going to venture an answer. I know that was not necessarily like answer this, but I think the people that I'm around and myself, when you have tried doing with people so many things and person after person after person after person has done illegal or unethical. And again, I'm not talking about like, oh, somebody had too much to drink at dinner. I'm talking about like molesting kids and, the horrible stuff. I think subconsciously you kind of get the idea that I must be doing this wrong. This must be a solo journey. Because every time I try to do this journey with everybody else, we all fall off the mountain. Like, maybe if I do it on my own, it's going to be hard, but at least I don't have this guy that's going to, it's not a conscious thought. I've tried all this. That's not working. So I guess I'll go over here and solo it for a while. And there's a lot of, I use this term very lightly, but there's a lot of people that are healers or helpers or people that want to serve that are in that place. I talk to them, I'm not exaggerating, on a daily basis. They're on their
So,
own because they don't know how to do it with a.
so I've had a lot of experiences, both in the West and the East and China and everything else, and met a lot of people and have had all sorts of different interactions and teachers and the one thing I can tell you is you learn just as much from the bad ones as you do from the good ones. And by finding and understanding what is not right for you is just as important as finding and understanding what is right. So hitting those landmines it's important to know how not to hit them. That's how you learn. And not everybody gets lucky, but everybody gets what they need. And this
Mm-hmm.
is what is difficult to accept, is you needed this journey. Your soul needed that experience for whatever reason. And I don't know the reason. I have a speculation, and the speculation is that that is what your soul needed in order to grow and in order to evolve. Because nothing evolves when things are okay or when things are good.
Sure. Yeah.
Nothing. You only evolve when it's hard. You don't create anything. Look at people who live in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me something that was invented in the Caribbean.
Rum?
Tell me
No.
anything. Well,
Yeah.
was that their invention, or did
No.
somebody bring that to them?
Somebody brought it there, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right. Because a lot of inventions were created in people living in cold climates because they had to.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. You have to have the horrible experiences, the bad experiences, the unpleasant experiences for your soul to learn and grow. And
Yeah.
if you avoid them, or if you try to avoid them, it will just become worse and worse and worse until
Yeah.
you stop avoiding them.
I heard it explained one time. Of course, I'll butcher this, but you can either learn from the experiences or you can be dragged over them and dashed against them.
You
Uh,
will either learn humility or suffer life's humiliation.
oof.
That
Yeah.
is in Yogananda's book. His teacher from probably 150 years ago told him that. You will
Awesome.
either learn humility or suffer life's humiliations. And I have done both.
Yeah.
Probably more humiliations
Right.
than the learning, but
Yeah.
that's a story for another time.
Well, I want to be mindful of our time and your time. I have one more major question. I know. So get ready. It's going to be bigger and you're going to have less time. So, this is my new form of like a Jeopardy game show. I kind of
This
like
is a
this.
horrible, horrible game.
Don't you love this format? Yeah. I'm going to do this until you just break. What's the meaning of life? You have 5 seconds.
42.
Yeah. So I love the direction that this podcast has gone, and it's a little bit different than our first one, the Phantom one. But this one I feel like is more for people that are in the trenches trying to help people. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of who watch this podcast because we talk about
Mm-hmm.
that a lot. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, and I mean this as a compliment to every guest that I've had, but I've never had a conversation along these lines that I feel like will help people wanting to do good as much as this. You know, we've had a lot of conversations about trauma, how to help people with trauma, all those things. But what got me excited about this was not only do you have an understanding and you've walked this understanding of the Tao, and the walking of it is more important to me than anything, you know, living by it, but you've also managed somehow, and this will show you how far removed this is for me, you've managed to work within corporations,
Mm-hmm.
helping corporations basically through the Tao, understanding, and those things helped them in the corporate sector, which means returns, right? Like things that seem so non supernatural, so non spiritual, so non. Um, so how do you live that world when you go into a place that's full on capitalism, not dogging capitalism, whatever? When it's about the money, when it's about that thing, how do those worlds even begin to fuse? I completely
Well,
confused.
they're all the same.
Okay.
This world is a battle for every single being, from the smallest to the biggest. And if you look at, the biggest, the whale, it eats the shrimp, or the smallest. We're all battling for a little bit of that sunshine. It's that sunshine that comes to this earth. Something absorbs it, changes it, and then something else eats that and changes it and eats that and
Trees
changes it
grow
and eats
towards
that.
the sun, right? Like,
Trees grow towards the sun. Everything in this world is a battle for resources. And the Tao follows the same path. It is a path for warriors. It is a path for people who want to thrive and survive in battle. And to understand that path, you have to understand energy. And from that point of view, the Tao has an amazing way of describing the interaction of opposite energies. And a lot of them call them light and dark. You can call them male and female. You can call it yin and yang. You can call it soft and hard. You can call it whatever. I mean,
It's the
um,
polar extremes is the idea, right?
exactly right.
Okay.
So when you're dealing with a battle, it doesn't matter if it's in corporate, but when that battle is won, the warrior needs to stop the battle and recharge. And the warriors who don't stop the battle and recharge die. So knowing when to stop earning money, stop meditating, stop thinking, knowing when to stop is one of the highest forms of spirituality. So bringing that into the corporate world, not just that, but just that aspect of it, helps the people who are engaged in battle to recharge, to see things from a different point of view. And no warrior, if you look at the old practices, when the warriors' practices, they were always male and female energy. The female is the recharge, recovery. The male is the explosion, creation, destruction, and everything else.
Right.
Right? Nobody can stay in the male for too long before collapsing. No warrior can. Staying in the female for too long means you never take a. Knowing when to use which one means the difference between not only surviving and thriving in battle, but actually living a great, content life.
Does
And
this,
it's
there's I can't remember the name of it. It's a very common thing. We all learned it in like 8th grade. But in order for an engine to move, it has to have, for it to continue perpetually spinning, right? Like I
mm-hmm.
remember we took a pencil and we wrapped a paper clip around it. And when it was solid connected, it wouldn't spin. But with a space missing, it would spin perpetually. And that's what that was. It was on, off, on, off, on, off. That's a natural system, right? Like that seems to be the natural way all of nature, right? The seasons and
you
all of that.
but you go to sleep, don't you? What happens when you don't sleep in time
Mm,
enough days? That's it.
yeah,
That's the end of you.
it's
People
over. Yeah,
die from not enough sleep, right? So the design is, you're absolutely right. It is the on off. What makes what is, and I believe the name escapes me, but what is the what makes a melody? The space between the notes. The
right.
pauses between the notes makes a melody. Otherwise, it's noise.
That's
What makes a
beautiful.
great life? The pauses between the experiences.
Wow.
Otherwise, it's noise. Otherwise, life is dead, right? Knowing when to stop is one of the highest form of spiritual practice you can possibly have. And we can dive into why it is we have such a hard time looking for that, etc. But that's a totally different podcast, and
Sure.
would take a lot more time, and it's a whole conversation. But that is, and we talk a lot about you and I, and a lot of times you reference this, that it all sounds so simple.
Mm.
It's simple, but it's not easy,
Yeah.
because you have the whole environment of society working against you. You are told that you constantly have to be thinking, that you constantly have to be productive, that you constantly have to be ambitious, that you constantly have to succeed, that you constantly have to measure up, right?
Yep.
So none of that is stop. All of that is go, go, go. What happens to a car when you go, go, go? You run out of gas,
Burn it out.
right? Same thing. We run out of physical energy, mental abilities, emotional energy, and ultimately our soul, nothing good happens.
So this, I mean, you're explaining burnout in a way, and you've never used the term burnout. We haven't said it a single time through this whole podcast, but you have explained so many things that have happened to me over the years that I've not been able to understand, right? Because I'll, I've cherry picked. What's it called where you self learn didactic or whatever? You wind up getting kind of like this weird hodgepodge of ideas. And
Mm-hmm.
I would meditate, feel better, feel recentered, feel whatever. And then other times I would just get angry when I would sit down to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I couldn't understand what it was. Well, the whole thing that I was doing was set up wrong. Like I was
Yes.
trying to force people to be helped. Like, let's just call it what it is, right? It doesn't matter what my motive or my logic was. I'm trying to force people to take medicine that they aren't willing to take.
And you're
Or,
spending a lot of your energy on that.
yeah, like try giving medicine to a kid, right? It's a fight. Or to a dog. Try giving it to a
Oh yeah.
dog, you know? I mean, so there's no way to just land this and wrap this up super nice for our audience. I'm hoping that people will take this, especially those that see themselves as people that prioritize helping in their community, you know, giving their time and their resources. I hope this sparks a journey for them, you know, that helps them. Cause I mean, I went to read the Tao Te Ching before I met you, and it's pretty, but I didn't have this construct to understand what it was saying. So it was just really poetry to me. Um,
And it was meant to be that because it's the biggest open secret in the world. It was meant
mm,
for that because if it's truly right for you, a teacher will walk into your life, and that teacher holds the keys to understanding it.
mhm.
And if it's not right for you, don't go on this journey. It will just confuse you even further. So that's the humility of even the Tao Te Ching is. It doesn't force anybody to like it or to go on that journey. It just says, hey, if you think there's something here, okay, great. Chances are a teacher will appear. And this has happened in my life repeatedly, so I know what I'm talking about.
That's fantastic.
Um, and if it isn't, and if it's just beautiful poetry, great. It is beautiful poetry.
Yeah.
Leave it at that.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
need for anything else. Or it's not the right time, and it doesn't matter.
Well, I'm so glad I didn't force it at the time, you know, and just try to start basically switch out my scriptures or do something like that. Um, again, there's such a love in my heart for you and for what
Thank you.
you've done and your journey and how you've gotten here. And I do want to say this. It's personal. I'm not going to share it, but the thing that you did that stood out the most to me, we had this great dinner. There's several people there. We're all, you know, talking. And then afterwards, just the next day, like, I don't even think you knew my last name. The next day we talked and you opened up about something that you're dealing with that was really, really hard. It's something that outside of your control. It's one of these things in life. But you opened that up with me because I too was experiencing something similar. That vulnerability, I think, is what cemented my willingness to even hear or consider another path, right? Like, I guess humility and transparency is a little bit of the theme of this. Is
Mm-hmm.
it's brought us together. It's always helped me find the next thing that I need to be working on. You did not come to me. You did not introduce yourself as a Tao master. You did not, you know, there was no, you were just a dude, you know, at dinner. And the
Mm-hmm.
next day, that dude then opens up. And there was even, you know, tears shared between us talking about how difficult these things are and whatever. And that felt like we were walking together versus somebody's like, I'm a master, you're going to follow me, all the arrogant stuff. And I fell in love with you at that point, you know. Um,
It's mutual, and I really appreciate it. And by the way, I really appreciated that moment.
mm,
That really helped me. The reason I can do that now, I can, is because of all the work I've done of understanding and working with my guilt and shame.
mm, oh God,
When those two things are not interfering in my life, I can be open, honest, and vulnerable with people that I like.
that's awesome.
And because I'm human, and what we had is one of the most human interactions imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how wonderful is that? I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
isn't
truly
isn't that
beautiful.
the whole point?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I didn't know, and this isn't a shameless plug. I want the audience to know I don't bring on authors that need to plug their book, or I don't belong to any of these organizations where people are traveling trying to find podcasts. Arthur doesn't even know I was going to do this, but I found out later about your book, Outlast. It's on Amazon. I just want to show people how incredibly complicated This concept. Now, look, man, you're talking to someone who barely graduated high school because of reading issues. This is awesome. So thank you. And, I just got it, like last week, I think. And in the Ford, this is the only thing I'm going to mention about the book. In the Ford, I highlighted it. People say it's so obvious, it's annoying. And I cannot think of a better way to explain my conversations with you. Yes, I love you. But when I get off our calls, I'm like, damn, I think I knew that it, it's, I just want to land it on the fact that it feels obvious, but it's not, because we live so far out of the natural system, you know? So anybody that's pointing the way back to a natural system of living, that's what I've committed wonderment to, and I encourage
While
people to read this book, by the way. I haven't gotten into it, but this is for what you've done with
Thank you.
corporations, right?
Yes, and
Okay.
it's my journey, and it was a battle that I was in 3 years in the making that I survived, and actually had an amazing outcome on. And from there, one day, a year afterwards, I just sat down and wrote out, 14 titles or 14, 15 chapters, and that was it. And then my goal was to write a book that anybody can open to any page and get
Hmm.
a value out of it without having to read a lot. Because when you're in crisis, when you're in a battle, you
Yes.
have
Yeah.
no bandwidth for absorbing complex or a lot of volume of information.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not that there's not more to talk about. Each chapter could be a book in itself.
Sure.
Um, it's just that I wanted it to be a coffee table book that you're like, hey, I just need to open it. And chances are, I guarantee you, like you'll open to a page and you're like, oh, this is so relevant to me right now.
Yeah.
And that's what I was hoping to do.
Yeah.
And it's helped a lot of people, and I'm really thrilled about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I do
So,
want to end. I have a tradition of asking our guests some questions. One question is from an adult, someone that I'm working with in Wonderment, and then another question is from a kid. And so,
okay,
the first one I want to ask you is from this kiddo, Matthew, and I'm looking at it here. His question, and I'm going to summarize it, is how do you live and do good? You're already hearing the thoughts. How do you live and do good when you are surrounded by people who don't think you're a good person?
okay. Well, let's start with the fact that there is no such thing as good or bad. Let's start with that. That is something that we created as humans. And because it seems like they're opposite, to us, it feels like they're real,
Hmm.
but it does not exist in nature. So let's start with that. That is what's right for you and not right for you. That's all there is. And even that changes depending on the moment. And then that also leads us to understand when you want to do good, what is that? What are you actually asking? What are you actually trying to do? What is the purpose of it? Why are you doing it? Answer the
Mm-hmm.
first, before you try to do anything, answer first the question, why am I doing this? To what end? Try to find out truly what that is. Not what you think it is, but truly what it is. And it only can happen in motion, in practice. You cannot sit and think about it and go, aha.
Yeah.
No, you do it by bringing it out into the world and seeing the results from your actions. And then saying, hey, am I going in the right direction or the wrong direction? Is my life getting better or worse? Are other people's lives getting better or worse? But other people's lives have to be analyzed from their point of view, better or worse, not your point of view, better or worse. Can
Gotcha.
you do that? Can you get rid of yourself long enough to see what it looks like from their point of view?
Mm-hmm.
That's the journey inward. This is all we're talking about is before you can go have an external journey, you have to have an internal journey. So that is, I think, is as deep as I'd like to get
Yeah,
into this
that's
right
great.
now.
Yeah, of course.
There's
That's
obviously a
great.
lot more to say, but I think this is where let's put a pin in that right now.
Well, and isn't it interesting how relevant that question is to our conversation? I mean, and this young man, he's under 10. Um, I know the concept is really coming from he's struggling that there are people that don't like him and think he's a bad person. And because of that,
Then
he
he's in the wrong
feels,
place.
there you go. That's it. And I love that. See that simplicity? That simplicity of like, oh, this isn't working for me. This isn't where I'm supposed to be.
That's simple as that. This is not your tribe. These are not your people.
Right
Go
on.
find your people.
Awesome.
That's the most important thing.
And by the way, you find your people by being consistently the same person. I don't mean same like forever, don't change, but you don't find your people by changing and trying to fit in with every tribe, or you'll never find them, and nobody will want you around,
No,
right? So, all right,
no.
the last question is an interesting one. How you, from the perspective of the Tao,
Mm-hmm.
how do you process shame? This is an adult. He specified shame that I earn and deserve, right? Like this gentleman did something in his life. He's paid the price for it. He was in prison for a while. Um, when I was talking about the Tao, his question was, how can it help me with the shame that I still cover, that I still carry? I mean,
Well, I'm going to give you the answer as best as I can, and a lot of people aren't going to like it.
all right,
And that's okay.
sure.
That's not part of my path to be liked by a lot of people. So, guilt and shame are artificial emotions. They don't exist. You have to be taught guilt and shame. A child is born to feel fear, hunger, happiness. Child smiles and laughs. But no child knows what guilt and shame is until it is taught. That is actually good news, man. Why is that good news? Because if it isn't real, you can work with it. And that's part of the clarity that I talk about, that a philosophy of clarity cannot be achieved by yourself. You need a guide who's gone through the clarity, who's been taught clarity, who's practiced clarity, who's had a lot of hits on the head because they didn't do clarity right.
Mm-hmm.
You need that person to help you come to some of those aha moments. And remember, the people who are in jail now, who we consider criminals, used to be our heroes. They used to be our heroes because 1,000 years ago, those people of violence were the ones defending our village from the bad. So the people that we think of as bad now were actually good people.
Mm.
And the people we think of as good now will become bad people eventually. And that is
Wow.
the problem with focusing on things that aren't real, that are artificial, that society creates. Because what society does is it creates values that change with time and geography. And nature has principles that don't change. And if you attach yourself to the things that are hard as a rock, principles that don't change, you will always have something to push off from.
Mm.
And if you attach yourself to things that are values that change with time and geography, you will always be walking a quicksand. Judging is a whole other conversation. That is
Yeah,
that is
a
that is
doozy.
so not in our time span of
Right.
this podcast. We might have another one that's just that.
I'd love that.
Um, yes, but the point is let me just give you a clue to what judgment is. And judgment is nothing more than analysis with time and emotion. So analysis is quick, instinct. Tiger, bad. Somebody coming with a gun, bad. You're not judging that person. You're not judging the tiger. You don't have any time to judge.
Mm.
All you have is analysis, instinct analysis. But when you have time and when you put on an emotion, it becomes judgment. And it isn't real.
You want to do a podcast tomorrow? I mean, good Lord. Now, I will say this in closing. Arthur and I are discussing doing like a series outside of this. I am going to commit to a journey of the Tao. I don't even know. I'm so new to it. I don't even know what to say. And Arthur, outside of this podcast, he's going to be walking me through the Tao Te Ching. I bought it. He told me not to read it. So it's just sitting there. I'm staring at it every day. But sincerely, I mean, I make a lot of jokes, but this stuff is truly transformative. And what I'm asking everyone that's watched this, if you've made it to the end, think of how many times you've heard something in this podcast that made you feel calm and it made sense. I'm asking for people to think about that and not run out and try to do this and just kind of let it wash over you. One of the things that I did with the Tao Te Ching years ago when I started reading it, it's beautiful. And I just kind of let it wash over me. And even then I remember feeling safe. I use that term because coming from a place of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
internal, and then when you hear something, you're like, oh, like I started on my phone a crisis tracker. I don't know if I told you this or not, but everything
Mm-hmm.
that spikes my blood pressure, which is 80% of the day, goes on my crisis tracker. And I got to tell you something, man. For the last 3 months, I've been doing this. Every crisis on that crisis tracker, when nothing happens and everything's fine, I check it off and I write the resolution in there. And it's only been 3 months and there has not been not one that turned into a legitimate crisis. So I want from a sense of those that I know are watching, people that are helpers, healers, they love community, they want to, just take a moment to feel. And if you feel the peace and you feel the safety, then I would say this might be something for you to keep looking at. Would you agree with that, Arthur?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Awesome.
For me, the aha moment, it was in my first year of studying in a temple, and I was taking a walk. And the aha moment for me, and it's different for everybody, but the aha moment for me was, and I still remember this so many years later. I still remember that walk, that smell, that night.
Mm-hmm.
Was that was a chance for me to be myself without guilt and shame. That was the aha moment for myself, and
Wow.
everything else came after. But that was the beginning of my true journey with it.
And you feel that that's true for everyone on the way of the Tao. That's
Yes,
what it does. Is it
absolutely,
frees you to be who you are without guilt and shame. That's incredible. That's incredible.
absolutely. Regardless of who you are.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Arthur, I could go forever, as you know. I've got 30 more massive questions, but I want to respect your time. I love you, so I'm just going to let you go at this point, but I want to plug this one more time. And again, Arthur didn't ask me to do this, but I
Thank you.
haven't even read the book. I just know Arthur, that's hard to say, has blessed me so much and has helped me already so much. I'd encourage you guys to check that book out. So, buddy,
Thank you.
I love you. This has been great. Stay on here. I'm going to stop recording. We'll chat real quick afterwards, but everybody, we'll see you in the next podcast. All right, stand by. Sure we do this right. I'm so nervous. Like I'm going to lose it or something. All right, we're close. 2 people. Yep.